Hey there everybody, welcome to Cathlist. I'm Burak, and today we will have a very special guest with us, Brother Richard Merling, the Vice Postulator for the cause of Solanus Casey. And once again, we're coming to you today from the pilgrimage site of soon-to-be-blessed Father Solanus Casey. In Cathlist episode 7, when we talked about a few people we would like to see canonized, we gave a brief overview of the process the Catholic Church uses to determine a candidate's sainthood. Now, all of us are called to be lowercase s saints. But there is quite a detailed process the Church uses for determining whether a man or a woman is an uppercase S saint. And in honor of the Beatification of Father Solanus Casey, which is right around the corner on November 18th, we are going to do a deep dive, and when I mean deep, I mean like oceans deep. When oceans rise. Deep dive into that process. The process to become a saint unfolds in several stages, and while the formal canonization process originated over 1,000 years ago, the process used today was simplified by Pope John Paul II before he became a saint. You're right, because you have to die to become a saint formally, and he instituted the new process, which by simplified we mean still really complicated, which makes a lot of sense. But anyway, he did that in 1983. Step 1 is an investigation of the deceased Catholic whom people regard as holy and worthy of sainthood, conducted by the local bishop. This process can't begin until 5 years after the death of the person in question, unless the Pope personally waives the waiting period, like in the case of Father Jacques Hamel, Mother Teresa, and a few others. The bishop's investigation looks to establish the basic holiness of the candidate, a devotion to them after their death, and signs of intercessions in prayer responded to. The local bishop may consult with other bishops and invite people to submit testimony on the candidate's behalf. When the result is positive, the bishop requests a nihil obstat from the Vatican. Kind of sounds like something a TV doctor would yell in a medical emergency. I need a nihil obstat stat. It's actually Latin and means nothing stands in the way. This is essentially full, unrestricted permission granted to the bishop to investigate the possibility of sainthood. Once this permission is granted, the candidate is now called a servant of God, and the bishop continues the investigation to compile more evidence. At some point after the candidate is approved as a servant of God, it is permitted to exhume their body and bring them into a church to be reburied there. This happened with Father Solanus in 1987 when he was reinterred here at St. Bonaventure. At that point, the church demands a special ritual supervised by the bishop, which has witnesses to testify that the body dug up is where the body of the candidate was initially buried. Then the coffin is opened to have those who were present at the funeral identify if it is the same coffin and is, if recognizable, the body of the servant of God. If the bishop considers the case strong enough, he again submits it to a panel in Rome called the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints. It's translated into Italian, and an official summary is presented to 9 theological members of a subcommittee. Stay with me. They review the submission before bringing the candidate's case to the whole congregation. If the congregation's vote is affirmative, the recommendation of a decree of holy virtues is submitted to the Pope, whose word on the candidate is final. Now, in the case of a member of a religious order, like Father Solanus Casey, the case is taken out of the hands of the bishop, and Rome designates it to a representative of the religious order, in this case, the Capuchins. This person carries the title of postulator of the cause, as they are postulating this candidate for sainthood. As the postulator is in Rome, he can name an on-site vice postulator, which in this case is Brother Richard Merling, who we will be talking to at the end of this video, which is pretty great. Next, the postulator of the cause determines whether the candidate has met the necessary requirements, demonstrating the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and the cardinal virtues, north, south, east, and west. The cardinal virtues are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Once all that is done, it goes through the same process that I just described earlier, and the Pope has the final word on the candidate. If the Pope likes what he sees and feels the prompting of the Spirit, then he can declare the candidate venerable. To move to the next step, beatification, evidence of a miracle associated with direct intercession to the candidate after their death is required. This establishes that the person is in heaven and able to intercede for us. So how do we determine a miracle? These days, most miracles attributed to the intercession of candidates for sainthood are healing miracles. The reason is they are usually the easiest to determine. To be considered a miraculous healing, the patient must be sick. And it would really help if the illness has no known cure. The prayers of the sick person must be directed specifically to the candidate. Then the patient must be cured totally and permanently. But the cure also must be relatively spontaneous, meaning that, for instance, in the case of a burst appendix, the person is totally cured within the next day or so, and the doctors cannot explain it. Or even better, if the healing occurs before the doctors have the opportunity to give any medical treatment. Because then how could they explain that? By the time the case of the miracle gets to the Pope, it has gone through major reviews. And if he acknowledges that a miracle has indeed occurred, then the candidate can be beatified by the Pope and will now carry the title Blessed. The candidate can now be given a feast day, though they are typically only venerated by regions or groups who have special connections to the candidate. At this point, the Blessed is allowed public prayers, images in the church, and my personal favorite, any images of the person can now include a halo around their heads. How cool is that? To be canonized, one additional miracle is required.
Mr. Zuckerman, another miracle!
So what does it mean if a person finally gets canonized? It is a statement from the Church that the person is indeed in the beatific vision in heaven, or in layman's terms, they're with God in heaven. That title means they lived a holy life, are now in heaven, are to be honored by the Church. However, this designation doesn't change anything about the person, but merely recognizes what God has already done in their lives. Now, don't go anywhere. As I mentioned in the intro to this episode, we have a very special guest with us today, Brother Richard Merling, who is one of the vice postulators and director of the Father Solanus Guild. I'm so pleased and excited to welcome Brother Richard Merling with us right now. Brother Richard, please just describe, if you would, how the whole cause for Father Solanus came to be.
It started some 60 years ago. And it started with a group of people who had known Father Solanus and were very determined and very assured that he would be a saint someday. The group of people gathered together and began to form these little groups around the Detroit area. And before you knew it, it had expanded beyond this vicinity. He had quite a following, and there were many people who just really wanted to see him made a saint, because they felt he was certainly a saint while he was alive.
So you are one of the vice postulators for the cause, right?
That's correct.
And so how did that come to be? You know, what does that actually mean for you in your role, and how did you get involved?
Well, I first got involved as being the director for the Father Solanus Guild, the group of people that were promoting his cause. It was about 6 years ago that the vice postulator, who was Brother Leo Wollenweber, and he passed away. Of course, being that I was so well connected with the guild and kind of worked hand in hand with him on many of the projects and things of this sort, that they asked if I would, as well as Father Larry Weber. So the two of us were then took the place of Brother Leo Wollenweber.
Wow. So in his beatification mass, it's coming up. And so in order to get to that point, though, we just outlined in the episode a kind of the process of canonization and beatification, all those different steps. And one of the kind of more kind of exciting steps, if you would, is the miracle. Right. So tell us about that.
About 5 years ago, that there was a lady that actually she was from Central America, and she was up here visiting some of the friars that she had known. She herself had a skin problem, I'm going to call it a disease, but it's been troublesome for her since her early years. Wow. As a child. She came here to the tomb of Solanus, and she wasn't praying for that, which was it's kind of interesting. But rather, she brought with her the intentions that she had for people that she had known down there in her country that needed some prayer. And so she went to the tomb and prayed there and prayed for them. And she said she didn't think anything about, praying for herself at that point. And after she left the tomb and she returned to her room, she realized that something was happening with her, that her skin disease was taking a turn, just something completely different from what she had experienced before.
Wow.
And all of the diseased skin that was on her was falling off. And so she was just totally amazed about that.
Yeah, that's dramatic.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I have to report this to someone. And so she came to me, to my office, and
She came to you?
she came to me.
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
And she says, brother, she says, there's something happening here with me. We made a point to keep record of that. And she returned home into Central America and went to the doctors there. And the doctors were totally amazed that this was no longer her problem.
Wow.
We began to keep in touch,
Yeah.
And so then it came to a point to where we kind of said, well, this could very well be the miracle that we were looking for.
Yeah.
And so we had to bring together a number of doctors. They did an investigation with her and questioned her in many different ways, and questioned her own doctor from down in Central America, and came to the conclusion that this was an exceptional thing, that this skin disease should heal up.
Wow.
And so in that manner then, they certainly credited it as being miraculous, and it was through the intercession of Ave Maria.
That's amazing. I don't know if the Capuchins fist pump or something, but there had to have been some serious excitement over, holy smokes, we've been praying for this, and here it is to keep the cause moving, because he was venerable at that point, right? And we were just waiting for a miracle, and the Lord provided, right?
Right, yes, and it was a very clear one,
Yeah.
Well, he certainly was a man of great faith, and he encouraged people to have faith and trust in God.
Well, thank you very much, brother, for taking the time. Thank you for hosting us in this beautiful home of yours. That is all we've got for Cathlist this episode. As usual, click to subscribe to the channel or watch more of these later. These are some special episodes about Father Solanus Casey. We'll do more coming up. We'll see you next week. Step 1 is an investigation. Scott, God bless you. Sorry. The bishop requests a Latin word from the Vatican. How do you say that?